All right, folks, thank you for joining me. Welcome to C Files. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And this will be the final reading of the night where we look at just this is kind of a fun reading where we just look at a book that I pick out and I just start reading through it on YouTube because it keeps me accountable in the reading that I want to do. And it gives you an opportunity to hear the book as well. This one, since we're in the Christmas season, is The Battle for Christmas by Stefan Nisenbaum. This is, I don't know what number reading this is. I'll figure it out when I load the video, but I do it in multiple videos. And I'll put, reading one, two, three, four, like that. It's a Pulitzer Prize finalist, A Cultural History of America's Most Cherished Holiday. This is a history of Christmas in America. And we're now on page 107 under this title of Creating Children. And so we'll begin there. Let me bring this over so I can see it a little bit better. There we go. Hopefully that's not too bright for you guys. That's a little bit bright for my eyes, though. There we go. It was during the 1820s that the Philadelphia Press first began to take notice of Christmas as a family event. Before the middle of the 1820s, Philadelphia's newspapers, like those in New York and other cities, had acknowledged the coming of Christmas only by printing a religious poem or an occasional admonition to remember the poor. The absence of a special notice should not be taken to mean that Philadelphians did not celebrate the holiday, only that their celebrations did not require comment. The change began with the 1824 Christmas season, when no fewer than four new almanacs, all published in Philadelphia, printed Clement Clark Moore's poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas. This marked the first appearance of the poem anywhere after its initial publication just a year earlier in a newspaper in Troy, New York. A copy of one of these almanacs recently sold at auction for nearly $30,000. Wow. Imagine that. Wow. 2 years later, in 1826, the same poem appeared in a weekly Philadelphia paper, the Saturday Evening Post. In 1827, another local paper followed suit, and a third paper published an extract from Washington Irving's Bracebridge Hall sketches. The rush was on in Philadelphia as well as other American cities and towns. More than any other text, it was Moore's poem that introduced the American reading public to the joys of a domestic Christmas in Philadelphia itself. In 1828, A Visit from St. Nicholas appeared in Polson's Daily Advisor. Now, try it again. Polson's Daily Advertiser. Why would you call it advertiser? I don't know. Polson's Daily Advertiser. Okay. And the National Gazette published another Antiquarian Christmas poem, Old English Christmas, written by Walter Scott. And in 1829, Polson's re reprinted a piece from a New York paper that gave a detailed explanation of the Santa Claus ritual. In the following year, 1830, the National Gazette editorially explained the inner meaning of the new Christmas. That paper would not be appearing on December 25, readers learned, because it was a day to forget business in favor of domestic pleasures. And domestic pleasures were the most important thing in life, more important even than social standing, poverty, and external disappointments and or calamities. The Christmas season, the paper noted, brings to mind the culture and value of the social and domestic affections. just as it reminds us of the comparative insignificance for private happiness of all that is beyond them. In Philadelphia, as in New York, then, the period from the 1820s to the 1840s was one in which the carnival form of Christmas was essentially read out as a legitimate form, as a legitimate part of the holiday, and in which the real Christmas, indeed, everything that really mattered most in life itself, came to be seen in domestic terms that centered around family and children. That process actually involved two elements. Thus far, we have dealt with the first of these, which might be summarized as keeping the poor away from the house. But it now became necessary not only to keep the poor outside the house, but to keep one's own children inside. Much of the rowdy behavior indulged during the Christmas season had been ascribed simultaneously and indistinguishably to youth and workers. Evidence of this abounds from the colonial period well into the 19th century. A 1719 Boston almanac warned householders in late December, do not let your children and servants run too much abroad at nights. A 1772 New York newspaper referred to the assembling of derogatory word today, N-word, servants, boys, and other disorderly persons in noisy companies in the streets. In 1805, a letter written from Albany, New York, reported that on account of the holidays, a considerable number of pennies has been given to the boys and servants. In 1818, a Boston woman noted that Christmas is now generally observed as a holiday. Our children and domestics claim it as such. And she went on to complain that the children, as well as the domestics, often spend the day in idleness and dissipation. It was this same social mix that John Pintard himself fondly recalled from his own childhood days in the latter 1700s, when he and a family servant traveled together around New York in boisterous fashion, drinking and a dram at every stop, and coming home loaded with sixpences. And as late as 1854, when the New York situation had turned ugly, a local newspaper complained that at most every corner gangs of boys and drunken rowdies were seen amusing themselves by throwing snowballs, using vulgar and blasphemous language, and otherwise desecrating the Sabbath. Children and servants, boys and drunken rowdies. Why this improbable linkage? To answer that question is to probe a much broader historical issue, the changing historical relationship between age and social class. I have been arguing that what happened during the 19th century was that age replaced class as the axis along which the Christmas gift exchange took place. But it would be useful now to modify that point. Until the 19th century, children did not make up a distinct social category. They were not a separate social group, as they are in modern Western societies, nor did they act as if they were. Instead, children were lumped together with other members of the lower orders in general, especially servants and apprentices, who, not coincidentally, were generally young people themselves. From this perspective, it becomes clear that giving Christmas gifts to children is not new after all. Young people did receive gifts at Christmas, but in their role as servants or apprentices or newspaper carriers, and not because they were children. Both children and servants were at the bottom of the hierarchy in the households in which they lived, linked to the larger household as much by bonds of labor and subordination as those of affection. For example, the term maid was used to refer not to a cleaning lady, but to an unmarried girl or a young woman. My, how language changes, doesn't it? Or a maiden. But the household tasks generally assigned to such females were ordinarily menial ones. The kind of work that was later associated with the term maid in its more recent usage. Conversely, servants and apprentices were treated as members of the household in which they worked and lived. Before the 19th century, in other words, class and age were thoroughly intermingled. What happened in the early 19th century was that age ceased to be associated with social status. Youth no longer connoted meniality. It no longer made sense to refer to girls as maids, or conversely, to speak to those of lowly status as boys, except in vestigial fashion, as in the term bellboy or cowboy, or notably, whenever the color line was involved. But just as black men commonly continued to be addressed as the B word, in order to con in order to connote their lower status, so too women of any race continue to be addressed as girls to connote theirs. And of course, the term maid has come to refer only to household servant. Only from the perspective of our own culture, in which age and class bear no significant relationship to each other, does it appear as if Christmas rituals of class were replaced by those of age. It would be more accurate to say that in the early 19th century, age alone was coming to replace a more general kind of status as the primary axis along which parents were given. The domestication of Christmas was thus related as both effect and cause to the creation of domesticity and of childhood itself, even to the novel idea that the central purpose of the family was to provide not simply for the instruction of his children, but for their happiness as well. And this next part is titled From Christmas Box to Christmas Present. We can glimpse something of this process by tracing changes in the very terminology of the Christmas gift exchange. As we have seen, Christmas presents had their origin in wassailing and other forms of Christmas beginning. I'm sorry. As we have seen, Christmas presents had their origin in wassailing and other forms of Christmas begging, in which the poor demanded gifts from the neighboring gentry. Generally, gifts of food and drink to be consumed on the spot. An urban version of the same ritual, known as the Christmas box, was developed in 17th century London and probably in other cities by young tradesmen, apprentices, and other low level workers who kept earthenware boxes, the ancestor really of the piggy bank into which during the Christmas season they asked those who employed their services to put money. The purpose of this box was to ensure that none of the money could be appropriated by a single individual and that it would be distributed collectively within the shop when the box was broken open. It's like tips today. Interesting. Men of means regarded their contributions to Christmas boxes as a necessary expense. Samuel Pepys referred to them in 1668, called up, waked up by drums and trumpets, these things and boxes having cost me much money this Christmas already. And Jonathan Swift wrote sardonically in 1710, I shall be undone here with Christmas boxes. The rogues at the coffee house have raised their tax. During the course of the 18th century, the term Christmas box came to be applied not to the box itself, but to the donation that was placed into it, and soon to any such gift. By century's end, the term was being used colloquially to refer to Christmas presents per se, when even those presents were commercial products given by parents to their children. Thus, a children's book published in New England in 1786 was titled was titled Nurse Truelove's Christmas Box. In Virginia in 1810, Mason Weems announced that he would sell his biography of George Washington at a deep discount to buyers who take several copies for Christmas boxes to their young relations. Unlike the term Christmas box, the word present did not signify something that was given as a tip or an obligation, but rather something that was given freely. But this term, too, was often used to name a gift offered by patrons to their dependents. It is striking that before 1780, I'll try it again, it was striking before 1780 that only two books published in America bearing the word present in the title were guidebooks for servants: A Present for an Apprentice and A Present for a Servant Maid. These works, which were reprinted frequently until about 1800, consisted of a series of short admonitory essays warning apprentices of the dangerous temptations they were apt to encounter in their position. These were presents given down across class lines, but apprentices and maidservants also happened to be young people themselves, so these presents were also given across lines of age. We have no way of knowing whether any of them were ever actually given during the Christmas season. The 3 decades following 1780 saw the apprentice of a spat of books with the word present in the title. But now there was a change. All children around 1783, uh, I'm sorry, where am I? I skipped a line. Let me go again. I'm not AI, I am fallible. But now there was a change. All of these books were specifically intended for young people. A Present to Children, 1783. Present for Mrs., 1794. A Present for a Little Boy, 1802. And its mate, A Present for a Little Girl, 1804. At first, these books, too, contained rules for behavior. Children, like servants and apprentices, were household dependents whose behavior could not be wholly trusted and thus required careful regulation. The first 5 editions of A Present to Children, for example, all published before 1800, contain nothing but catechisms and moral songs. One actually warned against playing with toys. But the subtitle of the 6th edition of this same work, printed in the year 1800, promised to introduce a new genre: entertaining stories. The change had begun. It had changed from books designed for training young people to books designed for amusing them. And just as age alone was coming to replace status in general as the primary axis along which presents were given, excuse me. Pleasure was coming to replace discipline as the primary purpose for those presents. It seems that Christmas presents slowly replaced Christmas boxes as gifts given within the household at a time when the household itself was coming to exclude servants from real membership. It was the isolation for children, I'm sorry, it was the isolation of children from other dependents at Christmas that produced, that was the the domestic the domestication of the holiday. Get my tongue working. Children's games, page 112. But in the early 19th century, Christmas had not yet become a child-centered domestic ritual, nor did children instinctively know that they were being created as children. Indeed, there were no Christmas activities for children other than making noise or making trouble. Christmas is now generally observed as a holiday. A Boston woman said in 1818, noting that our children and domestics claim it as such. And she went on to complain that it was generally spent in idleness or else in revelry and dissipation. The same woman also proposed that the local churches hold Christmas services, not for religious reasons, but so that families, children, and domestics can attend public worship instead of making trouble. It is interesting to learn that Christmas was generally observed as a holiday by Boston school children in the mid 1810s. But what is also interesting is the casual observation that children were taking the day through their own initiative rather than by virtue of any official policy. Our children claim it as such. And there is the implication, too, that their actions were informally sanctioned by those in authority. There is a story behind this one that reveals something about the nature of youth culture in the era before the invention of childhood, barring out the schoolmaster. School was one place, perhaps the only place before the 19th century, where young children, particularly boys, were physically separated from their peers in the lower orders. But at Christmas, schoolboys devised their own version of carnival misrule, a ritual practice that turned the world upside down, every bit as much as aggressive peasant wassailing had done. Here the figure of authority was the schoolmaster, and it was on him that the tables were turned. The ritual, which became known as barring out the schoolmaster, originated in England toward the end of the 16th century. A modern historian describes it this way. As Christmas drew near, the boys gathered together weapons, ammunition, and a store of provisions. Then one morning they seized the school premises and barred the doors and windows against the master. The most important goal of the buying out, the most important goal of the barring out, was to force the schoolmaster to grant his pupils a holiday vacation. In addition to the threat posed to their authority, schoolmasters had a reason to attempt to reclaim the schoolhouse. They were generally paid by the day and would lose their stipend if they were not able to teach. Barring out came to America early and rather violently. The year was 1702, and the place was a grammar school in Williamsburg, Virginia. On that occasion, students not only barricaded the schoolhouse, but actually fired pistols at the schoolmaster when he responded by trying to break down one of the doors. He reported what took place. Can I sound like a schoolmaster? I don't know. We'll see. About a fortnight before Christmas, 1702, I heard the schoolboys about 12 o'clock at night, a driving of great nails to fasten and barricade the doors of the grammar school. I made haste to get up, and with the assistance of two servant men, I had almost forced open one of the doors before they sufficiently secured it. But while I was breaking in, they presently fired off 3 or 4 pistols and hurt one of my servants in the eye with the wad of one of the pistols. While I pressed forward, some of the boys, having a great kindness for me, called out, "For God's sake, sir, don't offer to come in, for we have shot, and shall certainly fire at any one that first enters." I then resolved to let them alone till morning, and then getting all the other masters together, and calling for workmen to break open the doors. The practice of barring out continued through the 18th century and into the 19th, and extended into other regions of the United States. A letter to a Philadelphia newspaper written in 1810 objected to the practice, but acknowledged that it was commonplace there. A very absurd and wicked practice has long prevailed in this country, namely, that of scholars barring out the schoolmasters a little before the 25th of December, commonly called Christmas Day, in order to extort permission from him to spend a number of days called the Christmas holidays in idleness of play. A scene of this kind took place last year in our school, in this place. A few of the scholars took possession of the schoolhouse and so completely fortified it that it was impossible to reduce it except by a regular siege, and the caitiffs had provided against this also by laying in a large quantity of provisions. Thus was not only the teacher shut out, but also all those who wished to occupy their time in learning and not in idleness and riot. In this instance, a group of parents, including the writer of this letter, went to the schoolhouse to negotiate with the rebellious children. First, they prevailed on the rebels to raise one of the windows a little. Then, when they inquired about the purpose of the rebellion, the answer was clear. One of them, who seemed to be the commander in chief, replied they wished to have 10 days of Christmas play. The practice even penetrated into rural New England. Horace Greeley later recalled that barring out was common during his childhood in early 19th century New Hampshire. There was an unruly, frolicsome custom of barring out in our New Hampshire common schools, which I trust never obtained a wider acceptance, on the 1st of January, and perhaps on some other day that the big boys chose to consider or make a holiday. The forenoon passed off as quietly as that of any other day, but the moment the master left the house in quest of his dinner, the little ones were started homeward. The door and windows suddenly and securely barricaded. And the older pupils, thus fortified against intrusion, proceeded to spend the afternoon in play and hilarity. I have known the master to make a desperate struggle for admission, but I do not recollect that one ever succeeded, the odds being too great. Greeley went on to indicate that the practice was informally sanctioned by adults. If a persecuted schoolmaster appealed to the neighboring fathers for assistance, Greeley remembered they were apt to recollect that they had been boys themselves, and advised him to desist and let matters take their course. Snowballing, the battle for children. In whatever fashion it might be gained, the young people's holiday generally took the form of what its critics, such as the 1818 Boston parent mentioned above, termed idleness and dissipation. Young boys went around the neighborhood firing guns and squabs, making noise, playing tricks. We're at 31 minutes, but I'm going to continue on because I got to finish this portion. Children of both sexes drank and played kissing games. I'll read it again. Children of both sexes drank and played kissing games. Little mischievous children back then, too, huh? In its most innocent form, Christmas games meant having snowball fights. But even these could lead to disturbance and damage. Snowballing could become essentially vicious in urban areas where, during the Christmas season, respectable citizens associated it with the kind of menacing behavior they feared from working class youth gangs at Christmas time. Remember, for example, the language in which the New York Tribune describes the city streets during the Christmas season in 1854. The emphasis is mine. At almost every corner, gangs of boys and drunken rowdies were seen amusing themselves by throwing snowballs. That was how respectable adults saw it. But the issue was surely more complicated for many of the boys themselves, who must have been drawn in two directions at once. An old pull toward carnival in the streets, and a new one toward the quieter rewards that were promised at home. That double pull would have been especially salient in families that were positioned anywhere near the vulnerable lower borders of middle class respectability. Youths had belonged to such families constituted, I'm sorry, youths who belonged to such families constituted a major battleground in the transformation of Christmas. Young people do not often leave direct records of their inner experience, but a hint of what this inner battleground might have meant in human terms can be found in a careful reading of one rather sensitive Christmas story published in 1838 under the title Snowballing. The author of this story, Eliza Leslie, was a popular writer of the time. Set in Philadelphia on Christmas Day, the story tells of the adventures of a young boy whose father gives him a Christmas dollar and sends him downtown to buy himself a present. Left on his own, young Robert Hamlin encounters trouble. Unable to choose from the plethora of tempting items for sale in the shops, Robert becomes confused and begins to wander about the streets. In his wanderings, Robert comes upon an alleyway where he sees some rude boys engaged in snowballing. Rude boys is a phrase that may require some explanation for modern readers. See, the word rude was a reference to these boys' social class as well as their manners. A rude boy was a working class youth, the sort of person who might be expected to engage in forms of rowdy activity even more threatening than throwing snowballs. Robert is tempted to join these youths, especially after one of them throws a snowball at him and proceeds to laugh. But he is saved by luck from succumbing to this temptation. One of the boys throws a snowball at a woman who is observing the scene from the entrance of her house. The snowball hits her in the nose and hurts her badly, causing her husband to run out of the house and chase the youth away by brandishing a pair of fireplace tongs. Witnessing this scene, Robert feels glad that he did not belong to them. At this point, the author of the story is engaging in a significant gesture of evasion, for as we shall see in a moment, young Robert gets into a snowball fight after all, in real life, as opposed to a work of fiction. Someone like Robert would probably have joined the Rude Boys, but Eliza Leslie does not wish to have the fictional Robert become involved with such a crew. She has taken pains to let us know his social class. He is the son of an artisan, a respectable mechanic, which means that he is not so far in origin from the Rude Boys. While not a proletarian, he is not securely middle class either. If a real Robert Hamlin had joined those boys, he might have ended up in serious trouble, causing damage or injury, and his snowball fight might have been the first step in his descent out of respectability and into permanent proletarian status. Such a decent, Such a descent was far from uncommon among urban artisans in the middle of the 19th century, a period when independent artisanship itself was being subverted by industrial capitalism. Joining a gang of rude boys in a Christmas game of snowballs was thus a small but potent symbol of the larger dangers faced by the son of a respectable mechanic. If the fictional Robert is to get into trouble, then it cannot be with the rude boys. But get into trouble he must, and there is no point to the story. Eliza Leslie manages to devise a clever solution. The fictional Robert ends up getting into trouble with youngsters above his class. Yeah, moving up in the world, huh? Turning a corner away from the alley of the rude boys, young Robert comes up a row of very handsome new houses. And in front of these houses, he sees a party of rather genteel looking boys engaged also in snowballing. The earlier scene now repeats itself. One of these genteel looking boys hurls a snowball at Robert. But this time Robert joins in. He makes a very hard snowball and throws it at the boy who has just done the same to him. But Robert's aim is poor, and his snowball smashes through a window pane of one of the handsome new houses. Fortunately, no one is injured, though the snowball nearly hits the head of a pretty little girl. who has been sitting quietly, engaged in reading one of the new annals, a gift book she has presumably received as a present that very day. The girl screams loudly, and Robert hides. But the family's black servant rushes outside and confronts the other boys, threatening them with the wrath of the owner. Ah, you young nymphs, only wait till the gentleman comes home. I'll be bound, Mr. Cleveland will give you enough of snowballing for smashing his rights and property in this way without leave or license. Robert overhears the threat, and he quickly runs off and returns to his own house where his parents are just sitting down to the family's Christmas dinner. Having planned a domestic Christmas for their children, a festive dinner followed by a juvenile party at his aunt's house. But Robert, beset by guilt, is hardly capable of eating his turkey and mince pie or looking forward to the party. After a while, he gets up from the table, leaves the house, and goes back to the scene of his recent crime. There he confesses to having been the culprit who broke the window and offers the owner the dollar he had been given for Christmas. The same dollar he could not make up his mind how best to spend. Now he feels better and returns home again, this time to enjoy the turkey and mince pie, and the praise of his parents when he finally tells them what he has just done. As I have said, the dangers presented in this story were very real in households like Robert Hamlin's. We can assume that respectable boys did sometimes join rude boys in Christmas sport, and that snowballing was not the worst of their games. With snowballing as a partly symbolic act, Elizabeth Leslie's little story can be read as offering the same kind of warning to younger boys that older boys heard in the 1830s about the dangers of alcohol, or that girls heard about the dangers of sexual seduction. In all these cases, the ultimate risk was that of a serious decline in social status and a loss of respectability and independence itself. But if the dangers were real, so too were the alternative lures that were not being offered to the Robert Hamlins of America. Christmas dinner at home, tempting presents to play with, and even children's parties, such as the juvenile party that young Robert could look forward to at his aunt's house. Such activities pose no social risk, and some of them, for example, reading the gift books that were frequently given as Christmas presents, and in one in which Eliza Leslie's story, Snowballing, was itself published, even promised harmless amusement along with cultural along with cultural enhancement. In other words, of an 1840 newspaper editorial, good books are good gifts for children. And we'll park there for this reading. The next one is domestic games. How much further do we have in this chapter? Well, we got a little ways to go. This is a good place to stop. I should be able to finish out the chapter in the next reading. Yeah, that's feasible. And then to get into chapter 4. Hope you're enjoying this book as much as I am. I really am enjoying reading it. And let's see, put this over here. And reading it here for YouTube. Uh, we're going to finish this book up, probably hopefully before the end of February. And I got to choose another book to read, and there's so many good ones I have over here. I'm not sure where to go next. but between now and then, I'll figure it out. I might go with this one. Um, but this one was given to me um, as a Christmas present, actually, from our men's study. Heaven Misplaced, Christ Kingdom on Earth, Douglas Wilson. I might go with this one in the next reading. Thanks for watching. God bless you guys. I'll see you next time here on the C Files. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And, you know, this channel, you get to take a break from all of the hoopla that's out there and actually relax and enjoy a little bit. God bless. I'll see you next time here on the C Files.